and go ahead. Cool. So let's jump right into it then. Full screen. Okay, so the Finger Lakes Prism Trail Survey, just to make sure everyone is in the right place here, we have two different ways to participate in our trail survey. So you could be a trail tracker, that's for beginners, learn 6 invasive species. The method of surveying is rather simple. You guys are here tonight to be one of our trail masters. So this is our more advanced way to take part in the trail survey. You guys are going to be learning quite a few invasive species. We actually pared down our list. It's no longer 20, it's about 15 invasive species. You're going to have a more advanced survey method. And I applaud you guys for taking the extra challenge. Having trail trackers is great, but having people who can know a lot of different invasive species is always up our alley too. So again, just a final reminder here. If you haven't already, please download the Survey 123 app on either the Google Play or Apple App Stores. This is the app we're going to be using this year to track the spread of invasive species. If you have been with us in years past, we have used the IMAP Invasives app. Long story short, we're having some issues getting people on the IMAP Invasives app this year. And so we're going to switch gears a little bit to Survey 123. Actually, should end up being a simpler process than using the IMAP Invasives app. So hopefully it's going to be able to work out for everyone. But without further ado, just a little bit about us. So my name is Matt. I'm the Terrestrial Invasive Species Coordinator for the Finger Lakes Prism. PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We are a partnership between the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart University Colleges and the New York State DEC with the goal of advancing invasive species outreach, education, and management in the Finger Lakes region. So we cover 17 counties that we do our work in. And you can see in this little map down here, those areas. So pretty much everything between Monroe County, so like Rochester area, Syracuse, Binghamton, Ithaca, all of the Finger Lakes, huge area. So all of you guys are coming from different parts of this region. So some of you might be from Syracuse area, some of you might be from pointing to Syracuse. Actually in Rochester. Pointing, some of you guys might be from the Rochester area. Some of you guys might be from the Syracuse area. Down in the southern tier. Point is, you're all from a wide variety of different locations. Now, we are one of 8 regional prisms in New York State, so we do our work here at the local level within these 17 counties. We have sister organizations that do work similar to us, just in other parts of the state. So if you go towards Buffalo, there's a Western New York Prism, Adirondacks is an Adirondack Prism, and so on and so forth. And before we really dive into talking about you know, how to identify invasive species and what you guys are going to be doing as volunteers, I think it's important that we're all on the same page in terms of talking about what an invasive species actually is, because it could be a really nebulous concept. So these 3 pictures here do a really good job of showing us 3 very famous examples of invasive species. So up here in the top left, this is a Burmese python. This is perhaps the most famous example of an invasive species. These guys are originally from Asia, introduced as exotic pets into Florida back in the 70s. These guys can get up to 18 feet long, and they have gone crazy down in the Everglades. Down here in the bottom left, all this crud that is covering this propeller, this is an invasive species we are all familiar with here because it's very widespread throughout our region. These are zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are one of our worst aquatic invasive species. They've completely changed the way that our aquatic food webs function. And finally, here on the right, this is an invasive plant species that we don't have here in upstate New York yet, although climate change might have something to say about that. This is the vine known as kudzu, known as a vine that ate the South. And we can see in this picture here just how devastating kudzu really is. All of these trees and all of this ground cover has just been completely swallowed by kudzu. You can imagine if you are one of these trees, or if you were an understory plant living on the ground here, you are not having a great time. So when we're talking about invasive species, we're talking about organisms that have very different characteristics, or at least are not closely related to each other at all, have similar characteristics that allow them to become invasive. So, what is it about these 3 species and others like them that allow them to become invasive? Well, in terms of defining what an invasive species is, we could spend all night talking about that. point of the matter is that invasive species, any species that is non-native to an ecosystem, whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. And generally, invasive species share characteristics that make them really successful. So even though we're talking about a vine, or we're talking about a mussel, or we're talking about a python, they all have really high reproductive rates. They're all very aggressive. They all tend to have no natural predators. So especially here, when we're looking at kudzu, this is a species that the deer really aren't going to eat at all. They're going to be going after the native plants instead. And they're really good at taking advantage of human disturbance. And as we humans continue to change the landscape of our planet, it turns out that these new ecosystems that we're creating tend to be places where invasive species do really well. So you're more often going to find invasive species living in urban, suburban, and agricultural areas as opposed to less disturbed, deep, deep woods. Places like the Adirondacks and Catskills tend to not have a lot of invasive species. Does this happen? Well, lots of different pathways invasive species can move across. All that's really important to know is that the main common thread is they're being moved by humans in some way. And for our intents and purposes here in the east coast of the United States, the eastern half of North America, the temperate zone, our invasive species are largely coming from either Europe or Asia. There's two reasons for that. For one, these are the two parts of the world that are the most similar climatically to our own. So these places have 4 seasons, they have hot summers, they have cold winters. So they can survive in upstate New York pretty well. The other main reason is that us in the United States, you know, these are the two parts of the world that we are the most connected to, right? Economically, culturally, politically. So as trade and tourism is crisscrossing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, we're not the only species going along for the ride. It's important to know here that, invasive species, while we get a lot of invasive species from other parts of the world, we are certainly exporting our native species that are becoming invasive elsewhere. So, for instance, beavers are really invasive in South America. Raccoons are actually highly invasive in Japan. That's one of the weird stories when it comes to invasive species because there was like an anime in the 70s and everyone in Japan at the time wanted raccoons as a pet, and so that's how they were brought in. Super weird story. Encourage you to do research if you're interested. Squirrels are actually highly invasive over in Europe, where our squirrels are about twice the size and much more aggressive than the native squirrels that they have over in Europe. And even something like fall armyworm, otherwise known as fall webworm, it's a highly invasive insect species. Native here in North America, it doesn't cause us any big problems, but is a huge problem over in Africa and Asia. And the cost of invasive species, very widespread. You don't need to know all of this, but we're really talking about really big impacts economically, environmentally, and on human health. And really, when we kind of break that down into what does that mean to us? Well, ecologically speaking, invasive species have directly contributed to hundreds of species extinctions, like our friend the golden toad, who is no longer with us, worldwide. This is especially true in island ecosystems. And invasive species, if they're not causing species extinctions, they're causing the decline of thousands and thousands of species worldwide. They are one of the largest drivers of biodiversity loss around the world today, without a doubt. And economically speaking, invasive species have directly contributed to $120 billion in damage every single year in the United States alone. So, want to just reiterate this point here. It's $120 billion that we spend controlling invasive species every year. That's not over the course of a century. That's not over the course of a decade. That's every single year in just the United States. So we extrapolate that number more, and we're talking about $1 trillion problem here. The problem with invasive species is that while they can cause so much damage, we often have a really hard time being able to keep up with them and being able to track where they're spreading. So we talked about the Finger Lakes Prism before, and we showed like the little map of the 17 counties Finger Lakes Prism inhabits. And I'm the only person looking for terrestrial or land-based invasive species in those 17 counties. So big problem is I can't be everywhere at once as much as I would like to be, and that's where you guys come in to help us expand our network and looking for invasive species. Because so if we could have more kind of boots on the ground looking for these things, we can remove them before they end up becoming a problem. And we can kind of visualize how that happens with what we call the invasion curve. This is a generalization of how an invasive species spreads over time. And so what we want to do is essentially prevent invasive species from coming here in the first place. That's by far the cheapest and most effective way of dealing with invasive species. If we can't prevent them, at least eradicate them. And that requires us to detect that population when that invasive species is first establishes itself here in this region. So basically, not allowing it to have a long period of time to spread, because when it has only been here for a short amount of time, that means the area that an invasive species is going to infest is going to be really small, which means the cost of actually getting rid of these things are going to be really, really low. And the longer and longer this species goes without being detected, harder and harder it is for us to stop it because the area they infest is going to increase, which means the cost of controlling those invasive species are only going to keep going up and up and up. So our kind of goals go from eradication to containment to just kind of managing it in the long term. We have no hope of getting rid of this thing. So some of the species we talked about at the beginning, the pythons and the mussels and the kudzu, those guys are all way up in the top right of this graph here, where the area they've infested is just so large that the cost of getting rid of them are just so high. There's so many of them, we can't possibly get rid of them anymore. And so what our focus is to find invasive species populations, we can eradicate them, and so they don't get out of control. Oh, that is just some background information. How does the trail survey work? What are you guys going to be doing as volunteers? So our goal is to identify, survey for, and report invasive species in the Finger Lakes. So it's really just a basic framework there. Anyone with a smartphone or a tablet is allowed to participate. You can be of any age, any skill, any ability coming into this. Either way, anyone with either of those devices is welcome here as part of our trail survey network. Where it takes place is really up to you. So you guys are volunteers for us. We consider everything you're doing for us here a favor. So we really try to frame the trail survey around you and what you want to do. So we can offer some ideas as to where you could go to look for some trails, but really hike whatever hiking trail you prefer to hike in. Look for invasive species in your backyard if you have enough property for that. Do it when you're walking your dog and you're just going in your neighborhood or to a local park. Either way, wherever you want to survey for these invasive species is totally fine with us. And how we collect data. So you guys are going to be asked to survey 3 times, once a month in June, July, and August. It could be the same trail every month. It could be a different trail every month. Either way, all we're asking you to do is just survey once in each of those 3 months. Why survey trails? Well, it turns out that trails are places where invasive species tend to pop up pretty often. So trails are places where that are frequently disturbed, right? So we talked about how you know invasive species thrive in places that have a high degree of disturbance, and trails are no exception to that. Human foot traffic and trail clearing creates environmental conditions along trail sides that are often different than what you would find in the interior of the forest. So part of the nice thing about the trail survey is you don't have to go off trail and bushwhack deep into the woods to find any of these species because 99% of the time they're just going to be growing right along the trail where you can easily see them. So don't worry about having to go off into the woods. You can just stick to the trail. You don't have to go crazy here. And this is a perfect example, this picture right here, of how an invasive species grows along a trail. This is Japanese knotweed, and there actually is a trail here. If you look, kind of in the middle towards the bottom, this little path here, that is where the trail is supposed to be. And the Japanese knotweed has kind of exploited these increased sunlight and drier conditions that you can find along the trail. They've really crowded it out. So again, you don't have to go too far into the forest. They're going to be right along the trail side. So there are 3 steps we're going to go through tonight in order to take part in the trail survey: identification, surveying, and reporting. Identification is simple. We'll teach you. So you don't need to know any invasive species identification to take part in the trail survey. Although, because you guys are trail masters, I would probably hazard a guess that you have some knowledge of plant identification. But either way, if you don't know any of these plants, we are here to teach you. This is an old slide. I apologize for this. But it does lead us to this really good picture of the Japanese knotweed basically like swallowing the small shell. Apologize for the errant slide there. What I meant to get to was this. So how do we survey as part of the trail survey? So you're going to start wherever you'd like, beginning of the trail or wherever makes the best sense for you. And as you hike along the trail, you're going to imagine a circle around you with a radius of about 50 feet. You're going to then identify and map the invasive species that you can see standing in that area. Using Survey 123, you're going to report the size of the infestation and its distribution. We'll talk more about how that actually works later. And once you've recorded the invasive species you see, we're going to ask that you repeat this process every quarter to half mile. And you don't need to track your steps when you're doing this. A quarter to half mile is basically a 5 to 10 minute walk. So anywhere within that range is fine. Repeat this process every time you either see an invasive species or you go about a quarter to a half mile without seeing an invasive species. Part of this of the trail survey is that you guys are going to be recording observations even if you don't see any invasive species, because part of the problem for us is that we know where invasive species are, but we don't know where a lot of these invasive species aren't. And so even if you don't see anything, every quarter to half mile, you're going to be recording non-detections. I didn't find multiflora rose. I didn't find mile-a-minute. I didn't find Japanese knotweed, because we need to know where these invasive species haven't invaded yet. If you do see an invasive species, we do want you to stop and record those. But if you don't, every quarter to half mile works with us. And this is just kind of a better visualization of, again, once you stop and you either see an invasive species or you've come to that quarter half mile time frame, you're going to stop, you're going to look around you, anything within 50 feet, you're going to know. So the reporting is going to be done with Survey 123 on your phone. And you're going to upload all these species into the database. Survey 123 is a little bit new. This is the first training we're using with Survey 123. And we're going to get into Survey 123 in a little bit. So that's kind of the basics of how the trail survey works. You guys are going to learn invasive species, you're going to go out on the trail, and you're going to go report them whether you end up seeing them or not. You might be thinking, does this even work? Is this just sort of like a feel-good way to just get me outside and report something so I can feel like I'm doing something? Well, actually, volunteers throughout the invasive species world have continually found new populations of invasive species well before the experts have. So a very famous example is the first spotted lanternfly population in upstate New York was found by a normal volunteer in the Fall Creek neighborhood of Ithaca. There was a 12-year-old middle schooler who actually found the first population of the invasive Asian clam in Minnesota, in a lake in Minnesota. So people around the world continually find invasive species in places where they really wouldn't be expected, and often well before the experts had a chance to get in there. So if you're thinking that, you might not be able to make an impact or you might not find anything, believe me, you will find invasive species populations that we did not know about before. But with that being said, we're going to dive right into how to actually record, not record. We're going to dive right into how to actually identify the invasive species we want you guys to know. So there's about 15 invasive species here. Some of them you might have heard of, some of them you might not have before. Either way, keep close attention, and we'll jump right into it. So our first invasive species here that we're going to be asking you guys to look for is mile-a-minute. This is an invasive species not widespread in our region, but has the potential to spread really quickly. We only have a couple populations in Livingston County and down in Broome County. This is a vine, and as the name implies, mile-a-minute grows really, really quickly. There are some cases where mile-a-minute has been found growing as much as a foot within a day. So this is a species that can really overcrowd a lot of other native species. Now, mile-a-minute is very easy to ID. I kind of think of this as like the geometry leaves of the plant world, because their leaves are almost like perfectly noticeable and recognizable shapes. Most of the mile-a-minute leaves are going to be almost perfectly triangular. There is some lookalikes, things like bindweed or maybe even garlic mustard, but they're not going to be perfectly triangular like Mile a Minute. Mile a Minute will also have, while it has these triangular leaves, it will also have these circular shaped leaves that are going to be along nodes along the stem of the vine. So you're not only just looking for a plant with triangular leaves, you will also see these circular leaves there as well. So you need to see both of these different types of leaves for this plant to be Mile a Minute. That's how you really identify this plant strongly. Later on in the season, it will get some blue fruit. They're just beginning to pop up now, so you're not going to see it until later on, until like, July or August. And they do have spikes on the stems. That's Mile a Minute, an invasive vine species. Another vine species we have is porcelain berry, also originally native to Eastern Asia. This guy was introduced accidentally. Its identification, it's really similar to grapevines. This is a woody vine. Even the leaf structure here looks very similar to what a grape leaf looks like. Some ways you can be able to tell these guys apart from grapevines is that the leaf margins or the leaf edges are going to have some serrations or some teeth along the edge there. Certainly not going to have as many as like a grape leaf would. They're also going to be much more deeply lobed. So the spaces between kind of the ends of the leaf are going to be pretty deep within the leaf, while grapevine leaves don't really have these deep lobes that porcelain berry does. Also, later on in the year, once these guys actually start growing their berries, porcelain berries are going to be um, have quite a variety to them in terms of color. Some of them are going to be bright blue, some of them are going to be a purple or a pink color, and often have these little speckles of black spots on them. So, and you'll often see these different colored berries on the same plant. So if you're looking at a plant that has a wide variety in berry color, it's another good sign you're looking at porcelain berry. Same story here in terms of negative impacts. What we look at porcelain berry in relation to like Mile a Minute, this is an extremely fast growing plant. It can often overrun young trees. Another vine that we have is Oriental Bittersweet, Celastris or orbiculatus. This is also native to Eastern Asia. This one was introduced intentionally as a landscaping plant. This is another woody vine. The main feature you're going to be looking for Oriental Bittersweet, this is what I would recommend surveying for over later in the season in August. It's kind of hard to identify right now in May and June. It's going to have these bright red berries later on in August that are going to be covered in these yellow seed capsules. Those capsules will burst open in the fall, revealing the bright red berries. And the capsules actually don't leave the plant. They will stay on even after the berries have opened up and they're going to start being eaten by birds. Um, so with Oriental Bittersweet, you're going to be looking for, especially in later on in August, and if you want to survey in September, kind of a mosaic of green, yellow, and red coloration. Oriental bittersweet leaves are going to be kind of your typical leaf shape. They can have quite a variety to them. Oriental bittersweet leaves, when they are um, depending on how much light it's getting, can either be perfectly round or they can have sort of your normal typical lance leaf shape. Either way, the leaves aren't really remarkable, but they do stand out when we compare them to things like porcelain berry or Mile a Minute, just kind of like your normal looking leaves. These guys often girdle trees, so they're wrapping around the tree so tightly that they end up killing it because the tree can't grow any faster and they can often shade out any trees. This is by far the most common invasive vine species that we have in our region right now, at least with woody vines. We do have another vine here, that's the swallowwort. So these are two species, black and pale swallowworts. There's basically no difference between the two, so we just kind of lump them as swallowwort. This can grow either as a freestanding weed, or if it is growing near something it could wrap onto, can grow as a vine. This is originally native to Europe, introduced intentionally. Swallowwort's pretty easy to identify. So they have what's called an opposite leaf arrangement, which means unlike any of the other three species we've talked about so far, Swallowworts, the leaves will always be in pairs with each other. So every time you see a leaf on one side of the stem, there'll be a little buddy on the other side, as opposed to what you normally find in plants, which is an alternate leaf arrangement. We have one leaf on one side and one leaf on the other side. They're always kind of by themselves. These guys are really easy to identify because they will have very long, pointed, tapering leaves. They're oppositely arranged, like we just said. The flowers are really easy to identify. So if you look down here in the bottom right, they have these little brown star-shaped flowers. They're really, really small, and they're almost remarkable because they're so unremarkable. In terms of the flower world, this is not something that you're going to be, giving to a spouse, right? These are really kind of understated flowers. These are going to mostly pop up flowers, that is, in June and July. Later on in the season, once those flowers are pollinated, those flowers will become these long, tapering seed pods. They're almost kind of like a yellow pepper in appearance. These guys are a problem because they're actually closely related to milkweed, which is a native species, and they often outcompete milkweed, and they are actually toxic to monarch butterflies. So, a big reason why monarch butterflies are on the endangered species list is because of the spread of invasive species like swallowworts. Finally, moving out of the vines, we move to Japanese silkgrass, otherwise known as Nepalese brown top, but it's most commonly known as Japanese silkgrass. This is really our only grass species we're looking at, native to Eastern Asia. This is a grass that forms really dense carpets on the forest understory floor and is very commonly found along trail sides. Grass can be really hard to identify, but the main way you're going to be able to tell Japanese silkgrass apart from other grass species is, for one, they're going to have this white line running down the main segment of the grass blade. And Japanese silkgrass, really unlike any other grass species you're going to come across, try just pulling it out of the ground. If it comes out of the ground with pretty much no resistance whatsoever, that's Japanese silkgrass. It should be so easy to pull that even a child could pull it out of the ground. Any other grass species you're pulling out is probably going to give you a lot of resistance because those root systems can get so dense. That's not the case of Japanese silkgrass. You could just be able to yank it really, really easily. These guys will often replace native vegetation just because they form these really, really dense mats underneath them. And they're really adaptable and can live in a wide range of ecosystems. Now we're moving on to Japanese knotweed. So this is kind of like a freestanding herbaceous weed, originally native to Eastern Asia. There's actually quite a few different species of knotweed. They're pretty much all invasive. These guys are really, really hard to get rid of. They're famously probably the hardest invasive species we have to actually remove once it gets to a site. Now, the way you can identify Japanese knotweed is that it's going to have these really large, really circular leaves, probably about the size of your hand at its smallest, and they could be maybe in some cases like double the size of your hand. So we're talking about really, really, really large leaves, almost perfectly circular. Later on in the year, they're going to get these white kind of wispy flowers. We could really see that in this picture down here along this roadside. You're not going to see that until later on in the season, though, like August. For now, you're just going to be looking at these big leaves. Japanese knotweed also, while it's not closely related to bamboo, the actual appearance of the stalk of Japanese knotweed is very, very reminiscent of bamboo. And so if you're looking at a plant that kind of looks like bamboo and then has these big circular leaves, that's going to be Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed has really big problems because they could form incredibly dense thickets. This plant is actually adapted to growing on volcanic slopes over in Japan. So they can actually grow in just the worst places unimaginable. You often see them poking up through concrete in on sidewalks or in asphalts on in parking lots, and they can actually grow into the foundations of buildings. So this is a plant that could do a lot of damage to infrastructure, in addition to the damage it's causing to our ecology. Honeysuckle. So honeysuckle is a shrub. It's a mix of different species, all within the Lonicera genus. They're all essentially the same thing. So we just kind of throw them together and just call them honeysuckle. Native to Eastern Asia, this woody shrub is actually flowering right now. So if you go out and you look for these guys, you're going to see these white trumpet like flowers. They're not always white. Sometimes you'll get like a pinkish color to them, but either way, they're going to be these really fragrant white trumpet shaped flowers. They're going to have an opposite leaf arrangement, just like the swallowworts do. All the leaves are going to be in pairs, and the leaves of honeysuckle are going to be really, really small. So they're going to be like about the size of your thumbnail, not that much bigger than that. So small, really round, oval shaped leaves that are oppositely arranged with these flowers is going to be the main way you can tell honeysuckle apart from other plants. You can actually another way you can tell, this is kind of the foolproof way of doing it, is if you can break open the stem, and you have to get a really clean cut, and this is easiest to do on old dead stems. The stem is actually hollow on the inside. This is a feature that's only found on honeysuckles. These guys are really a problem because they can form really dense thickets that inhibit the growth of really any other plant species. Now, one thing I do want to make sure that I'm mentioning here too is that once these flowers are pollinated later on in the summer, mid to late summer, these are going to have bright red or bright orange berries. So if you see a plant without these flowers but has all these other characteristics and have bright red and bright orange berries, you really can't miss them. That's going to be a honeysuckle. Japanese barberry. This is a plant that is planted in like every Wegmans parking lot. Japanese barberry, invasive shrub, native to Eastern Asia, as the name implies. This one is pretty easy to identify. So Japanese barberry often has this really dark, kind of reddish purplish coloration when it's seen in cultivation, but it will usually grow green leaves when it escapes into the wild. Now, Japanese barberry has really, really small leaves, so they're all going to be smaller than your fingernails, and they're going to grow not in an opposite arrangement or an alternate arrangement, but in what we call whorls. So they're basically going to be in a circle, coming out from a central point, kind of all radiating outward. So you could kind of see in this picture in the middle here, Japanese barberry. Not only is it going to have these small leaves growing in whorls, it's going to be covered in thorns. So kind of steer clear of this plant. Don't get too close to it because it can cause some damage to you. And once we get later in the season, it's going to grow these red kind of oblong berries on it. You're going to see that more in like August, though. These guys, just like all the other shrub species we have, can form really, really dense thickets. Multiflora rose is another invasive shrub species we have native to Eastern Asia, introduced here intentionally. Multiflora rose is famous for its beautiful white flowers. People love these things despite the damage that multiflora rose can cause. Multiflora rose has what's called compound leaves. So this, if we look at this picture here in the bottom, this whole structure is just one leaf, and each of these coming off here is an individual leaflet. The reason why that is because the bud of the leaf is actually down here where it comes off the stem. So this whole structure is one leaf. Gonna have compound leaves. It's gonna have thorns all over it. It is a rose, so do be careful. Um, and the main way you can tell multiflora rose apart from any other rose species, whether it's native or invasive, is at the very base of the leaf, you're gonna see these two main um, they're not necessarily thorns, but that's essentially what they are. These two kind of V-shaped thorns coming out here. So you have one over here, one over here. This is a feature that is only found in multiflora rose. It's not found in any other rose species. So when you're looking at a plant, you think it's a rose. It has this kind of compound leaf with these serrated edges to it. Look at the base. If you see those two thorns coming out, that's a multiflora rose. If you don't see them, then it's some other rose species. Common buckthorn. This can either grow as a really big bush or a really small tree. This is an ornamental introduced intentionally. Common buckthorn is going to have these really glossy, circular shaped leaves, smaller in size. And actually, at the base of a lot of these leaves, you're going to have thorns coming out. So you're not going to see thorns along the main stems, but you're going to see them along where the buds are for the leaves. Common buckthorn is incredibly common. It's established in a wide variety of different habitats. This is really the one of the only plants that we have here that really kind of grows as a tree. So if you're seeing something that has, kind of one main stem that's kind of shooting up really tall past you, and you think it might be one of the species we're learning here tonight, it's probably going to be common buckthorn. So look for those green glossy leaves to them. Later on in the year, they're gonna have these kind of jet black berries to them. The berries are not edible, they're not really good for wildlife in any way, but you really can't mistake these blackberries for anything else. So as you're surveying throughout the year, keep an eye out for these berries once they eventually come out. Buckthorn, same problems that a lot of our other invasive species have. Crowd and shade out a lot of native plants. It's actually a host for the crown rust fungus, which is a fungus that doesn't hurt the buckthorn at all, but can actually attack oak trees. And its leaf litter actually changes soil composition. So we have quite a few different impacts of common buckthorn here. Autumn olive, this is listed as a tree, but it really grows more often as a big shrub. Autumn olive, originally native to Eastern Asia, like a lot of these species, like I keep saying, is an ornamental. Now, autumn olive is a really, really easy plant to identify. So the main way you're going to be looking at that is through the leaves. The leaves are and the berries are going to be covered in these little silvery specks all over them. So the berries are going to be out more later on in the year, but both the berries and the leaves will be covered in little silver specks on them. Super easy to identify once you actually see it and get a handle for it. And I realize I don't have a super great picture you could kind of see in this leaf up here if you look closely, but in the follow-up, I'll send some better pictures of what these leaves look like. And all of the slides that we're going through here today, I will send in an email following our training tonight. So don't worry if you don't get all the information here. You're going to have all the information to look through later. But yeah, really just those silver specks. It's its main giveaway. Really nothing else has those silver specks. So it's similar to honeysuckle in sort of appearance and sort of leaf shape, but it's going to have an alternate leaf arrangement. So really you're looking for a shrub here, alternate leaf arrangement, specks on the leaves, and going to be specks on the berries once those pop out later in the year. Privet. So privet is a kind of like honeysuckle. It's a few different species we all kind of just lump together. You can't really tell them apart in any meaningful way. Privet is a shrub grown as an ornamental, pretty common as an ornamental, I would say too. These are going to have really long stems of opposite leaves. So oftentimes on a single privet stem, you're going to see like 20, 30 leaves on there. As you can see here, it's very similar honeysuckle in appearance, but there are a few key differences. For one, again, of just a lot more leaves and a lot longer stems. The twigs are going to be hairy, which is a feature you're not going to find in honeysuckle. The flowers look kind of similar, but they're more like bell shapes instead of like trumpet shapes in the way that honeysuckles are, and they're going to kind of hang down in clusters, as opposed to just being on the stem perched on the stem like honeysuckle flowers are. And then later on in the year, um, privet are going to have like a darker blue berries to them, while honeysuckle are going to have red and orange berries. One thing too with privet is that the leaves usually kind of make like a V shape when they're on the stem. They're usually kind of facing forward, while on a honeysuckle stem, the leaves are going to be more oriented, kind of just left and right, and not really like kind of leaning forward like these leaves are here. Oh, those are our main plant species we're on the lookout for. There actually is another one coming up. Few other things that we're looking for here. Oak wilt. This is a fungal disease that can cause a lot of problems for our oak trees. So if you're hiking around and you see an oak tree where the leaves are look like they're turning brown in the middle of summer, um, it's a really good sign that that might be oak wilt. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we deal with oak wilt, and it's really you kind of need to actually do a laboratory test to tell whether it's oak wilt or a different fungal species or not. But either way, if you think you do see an oak tree that is whose leaves are turning brown on a few branches in the middle of summer, that's a sign that might be oak wilt. And right now in our region, oak wilt is really only found in Ontario and in Yates counties. So if you're hiking in those areas, be on the lookout there. Norway maple. This is one of our, I believe this is our last plant species here. This is a fully fledged tree, and unlike buckthorn, which can, grow to like 15, 20 feet tall, Norway maple really is, in every sense of the word, a true tree. The name implies this guy is originally native to Europe. Looks very similar to a lot of our native maple species, and its leaves are almost identical to a sugar maple. The main ways you can tell them apart is that you often will see these guys when they're planted with dark purple or reddish leaves. That's a Norway maple 100% of the time. Although when they do escape into the wild, they will grow green leaves. Main way you can tell them apart though is that if you actually break a leaf off the from the stem, you have to break it off where it's coming off of the stem, and you squeeze it at the end, it'll actually have a white sap that comes out. This feature is only found on Norway maple. It's not found on any of our native maple species. They all have clear sap. So if you see at the base of a leaf, and again, you squeeze at the end, white sap coming out, that's a Norway maple. Norway maples also have a very different bark than our native maples do. They will often have a dark brown kind of lattice shaped bark, lots of ridges, lots of furrows in there. Most of our native maples have really smooth gray colored bark. So the bark and the leaf sap are going to be the main way you can tell these guys apart. And then these are some characteristics of our native maple. So this is native sugar maple bark we have here on the left. Again, you can see how it's like a gray color as opposed to this darker brown color we have here. And it's not really going to have a lot of ridges and furrows. There's kind of some flakes here, but it's relatively smooth considering. And then these are some other native maple species leaves. You can see Norway maple most closely resembles sugar maple, excuse me. Doesn't really look anything like striped maple, mountain maple, red maple, or silver maple. And funnily enough, Canada's flag is actually based on the Norway maple leaf when it's supposed to be meant on the sugar maple leaf, which I just think is always funny. Beech leaf disease. This is a really important disease that we want you guys to be on the lookout for, and something that's spreading really, really fast. This is an invasive disease caused by a microscopic nematode. Its arrival is largely unknown. The future with beech leaf disease, a lot of unknowns here, because it really has only been found within the last few years. It's spreading eastwards across our region, and really the main signs here is that if you look at a beech tree, you're going to see dark coloration between the leaf veins. That's really the main sign of it. Now keep in mind here, when you're looking at these leaves, the amount of sunlight is going to make a really big difference. So this is a picture I took of the same leaf infested with beech leaf disease, the very same spot. And this is what it looks like when you are facing it towards the ground, and this is what it looks like when you're facing it towards the sky. So when you're looking for beech leaf disease, make sure that you're getting a lot of backlighting on that beech leaf, because that's how that like dark coloration between the leaf veins is gonna pop up. If you're looking at it just towards the ground or in a really dark area, it's gonna be really hard to see that dark coloration. You can kind of see it here. Now, beech trees are really, really easy to identify. They're one of our most common tree species. They're a native species. They have a really typical leaf shape and arrangement to them. They often have a really, really smooth, almost a white bark. You really can't miss it for anything else except for maybe red maple. Now that's what a healthy beech looks like. There are beeches that have beech bark disease, so that really smooth bark will kind of crinkle and crackle to it, but that's still a beech. And there are some other diseases that affect beech leaves, but none of these are really a big problem. So if you see any leaves that are like curling or have any yellow coloration to them, that's not what we're looking for with beech leaf disease. We're really looking for just these this dark shading between the leaves. No curling, no yellow coloration. Tree of Heaven, this is our second to last species here. This is highly invasive tree species, native to Eastern Asia. Really big compound leaves with lots and lots of leaves on them that have smooth margins. The bark is going to kind of resemble the texture of a cantaloupe to it. This tree too, if you actually break off the leaves and you give it a smell, a lot of people think it's really gross. It's very, very, very pungent odor. And some people say, I would agree that it smells like burnt peanut butter. Main reason we're concerned about Tree of Heaven is because of the main host for the invasive insect species. The only animal you guys are going to be looking for, the spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly is a highly invasive insect species that's rapidly spreading throughout our region. Eggs of spotted lanternfly are just beginning to hatch now, and so what it's going to look like in May and throughout June, it's going to be small, black with white spots. Later on, midsummer, so in July, it's going to have these red stripes coming down it, and then later on in August, it's going to hit its most famous stage, where it's going to have these pink wings with black spots on them. So those are our species you guys are going to be on the lookout for. If you have any trouble identifying any of these species, this is not the main app that we're going to be using to record invasive species, but I highly suggest you check out Seek. It's basically an app where you can kind of point your phone towards a species and will do its best to identify it. So I pointed it towards my ferret and correctly identified it as a European polecat. It's just another thing to consider if you have trouble or just need any help with any of these species. Keep an eye out if on our website if you're interested in learning more about a lot of these invasive species. There's tons of information there on what these species do and where they're most commonly found. And you can find our website at fingerlakesinvasives.org. So thank you guys. That's the end of our identification presentation. So Survey 123 is used by Esri. This is the same company that makes ArcGIS. You don't really need to know about that, but basically there's a data collection form on Survey 123 that's run by IMAP Invasives. IMAP Invasives is the main app that we in New York State use to track the spread of invasive species. It's a database that's a partnership between SUNY ESF and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And basically, it's an app that pretty much all the major conservation players in New York State use to track the spread of invasive species. It's really, really helpful for us. And so the data that you're going to be entering is accessible to literally everyone. So what that means is that if you live, let's say, in the city of Rochester or the city of Ithaca, and you go onto a city park and you find an invasive species, not only are you and I going to know that you found those invasive species, but the city of Ithaca could then go on and see that, oh, hey, Bob found spotted lanternfly in one of our parks. Or City of Syracuse can go on IMAP Invasives and say, oh, Jill found Norway maple growing in one of our parks. And so then those organizations can then use the data that you guys are collecting to inform their invasive species management decisions. So that's kind of a background as to what this tool actually is. If you go online, you can actually hop around on IMAP Invasives. It's an interesting website, interesting stuff if you're really interested in any of this. But we can kind of skip through a bunch of this right now. You don't need to deal with any of this. What we do care about is, let me just move this down here so you guys actually see everything, is the Survey 123 form. So this is what we want to do. This is through IMAP Invasives on Survey 123. The setup is pretty simple. You're just going to download Survey 123. We're going to download the IMAP invasive form on Survey 123. And then we're going to actually go through and take a practice point together. So what you need to do right now is I want you guys to take out your phone or your tablet or whatever device you're going to be using Survey 123 on. And I want you to go not on the app, but onto your device's browser. So whether that's like Safari or whatever app, Google app you use, go on your device's browser. And in the search bar, so when you're typing in to go to a website, the web address, type in arcgis/VFE capital T capital W. I'll give you guys a second to do that real quick. And I'll go along with you here, so we're all in the same boat. VFE, I'm sorry, IS/VFE capital T capital W. VFE what this is going to do, it's going to take you to a site where it's going to ask if you want to open the app or not. Or open the survey. You're just going to hit open the survey, and it might ask you open this link in an external app. You're just going to hit OK. And then if you've already downloaded Survey 123, it should bring you on over to the Survey 123 app. Now, once you're actually at this app, what you're going to do, there's going to be three main options here: sign in, manage. We don't care about either of those. What you want to do is continue without signing in. You don't need an account for this. And what it should do is it should download the data form for you and should bring you to this form that says general questions, observer information, blah, blah, blah. Does everyone see this so far?
I'm lost.
Yeah.
Where did you lose everyone?
Can someone?
There we go.
Yeah, I don't have any surveys on your device. So do we download a survey?
Yeah, so the way you would download the surveys, again, you would type in this and then this link into your web browser, and then it should take you to where it says
Yes, I got to the middle one. I clicked on continue, and I got you don't have any surveys on your device.
Okay. Maybe we could walk through this together, John, at the end, just for the sake of everyone's time. What other issues are people having so far?
I got the first diagram that's on your screen, on my phone with the, where it has the, and then it has on your page, it says open the survey and it's got a red line around it.
Yep.
So is that what I do next?
Yes,
Is
you
open
just
the
want to hit,
survey?
yeah, you just want to
Okay.
hit right down there, open the survey.
Thank you.
No problem.
Mine doesn't have a choice. It just says sign in. It doesn't have a choice of proceeding without signing in.
Oh, did you use Survey 123 for anything else, Sarah? Is this the first time you've used it, or have you used it before for other occasions?
I don't think I've used it, but
Okay, that's really weird. That's saying that's not giving you that option.
we're not installing the app for Survey 123.
You want
Oh,
to
we
want
are.
to install the app first, yeah, before we do any of this.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is that your problem? You hadn't installed the app beforehand?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so you want to, again, so you want to make sure this only works if you install the app before we did any of this.
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we already have IMAP invasives on our phone, we use IMAP invasives. Because this is an IMAP invasives form, do we really need to download all that, or do we just
No,
use
you don't. So there's two things here. If you like IMAP invasives and you're comfortable with using IMAP invasives, that's totally fine. The main reason why we're using Survey 123 is because we've had some issues where people with Android devices can't download the IMAP app onto their phones. So this is kind of our only option right now. With that being said, the Survey 123 app actually is kind of easier to use than the IMAP app. It's a lot less clunky, and you can collect a lot more information more quickly. So if you're fine with using the IMAP app, then you're free to go. If you already have it already. But if you want probably a more streamlined experience, or you just don't really know how to use IMAP that well, then I would stick around for the Survey 123 training.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out what my IMAP invasives ID actually is right now.
Oh yeah, you don't need. Okay, yeah. So you don't need to worry about your IMAP ID.
Okay.
Yeah, for Survey 123.
Okay.
Okay, so how is everyone doing so far with these steps? This is the hardest part that we're going through. So
Okay, good.
it gets easier after this.
I'm not doing good.
Not doing good. Okay,
Don't
Patricia,
feel
what's
bad.
going on?
Either.
I did download the Survey 123,
Okay.
and then I lost what you said to do.
Okay, so the next step to do, up here, you see this little text in your device's browser. What I want you to do, go on to whatever internet access you have. And in the search bar at the top, so don't type this into like Google or anything, like in the actual search bar, the very, very top up here, type in this text. So arcgis/VFE.
Hold
CW.
on.
Again, it could be way worse. It could be way worse, but it's right up here. So that's the text you want to use. I wish there was an easier way of doing this, folks. Unfortunately,
Not hard. It's
yeah. Yeah, so anyone who was able to actually use it, is there anyone who's good so far? Just to make sure.
I'm good.
Okay.
So
Go
it's asking me on the screen I have on my phone now, it says, do you have an IMAP Invasives account and know your map invasives person ID?
Yeah, so don't even worry about that. You just want to hit
Don't worry
no.
about that. Okay, so should I click no
Yeah,
underneath?
no, so
there
if
then?
you're at this final slide, just stop right there. You're good.
Okay,
It's asking
okay.
you have an account. That's fine.
I did download it, but I don't know if I ever set up any kind of ID.
No. You're good. We're gonna walk through all of this right now.
Okay.
You're getting ahead of us. Okay, so for the sake of time,
Okay.
we're gonna
That's
keep
nice.
walking through this. If you haven't gotten to this final slide here, let me know and we'll talk about it at the end. But for the sake of time, we're gonna keep running through this here. But basically, you want to get to the point where we were just talking about. So it's going to ask you observer information. Do you have an IMAP account and know your IMAP person ID? If you know this information, if you have an account, you volunteered with us before, you can hit yes, fill it in. If you don't know your ID or you never made an IMAP account before, just hit no. That's fine. That's totally fine. Just hit no. So once you hit no, and again, I kind of wanted you to do that there. So no, just type in your name, type in your email address, and then it's going to ask you IMAP Invasives organization ID. None of you belong to an organization. You can skip that. But below that, it's going to ask you IMAP Invasives project ID. This is very important, folks. For the project ID, please put in 1025, 1025, 1025, however you want to say it, 1025. Please make sure you are putting this in for every observation you take. This is the main way that we can track everyone.
Matt, are you going back again? I never got past that arcg.is, whatever.
Yeah, we're going to be getting there, and we're
Okay.
going to go back, just for the sake of time, Daryl, just for the other people who aren't having issues. We're going to run through it real quick. But this is what you would be doing if you were able to get to the screen. The date's going to be at the bottom. You want to select your state as New York. And now, key feature here. Once you fill out all this information, stop. I need you to stop, and what I need you to do, once you type in your email, once you type in your name, is you need to set all of this information as your favorites. So for every point you take as a volunteer with us, is going to ask you to put in your email, put in your name, put in your state, put in your project ID. So what you can do, so you don't have to keep typing this in over and over again, is once you type in the project ID, your name, your email, and your state, what you're going to do is go to the top right where these three little lines are. You're going to click that, and you're going to hit the star. It says set favorite answers. And that's it. Just hit set favorite answers. This way you can go through this process just in one click, as opposed to having to retype it over and over again. Once you go through all of that, you are going to hit, it might take you out of the screen back here, but either way, when you go to collect new information again in the future, you're just going to go to the top of these three bars over here and you hit paste answers from favorite. You're going to fill out all this information for you for the next time. But that's not what we have right now. This is just for future points that you take. You can just paste the answers from your favorite. So how to actually take a point very simple. So if you're gonna get down, once you type in your state, it's gonna say geographic data collection, simple, advanced. And we want simple. We want the easy stuff. So you're just gonna hit simple. And then below that, it's going to have presence records, non-detected records, treatments applied. Does everyone see that so far? It's gonna have like a little search area. It's gonna have presence and non-detected. The people who are still with me, are you guys seeing this?
No, no, oh, no,
No, where
you're getting too far ahead of me. I don't know.
I got it.
you got it. Okay, thank you, Holly.
I think we actually did this at Cummings Nature Center with the woolly adelgid.
Oh, we did. If you were at one of our recent talks, we did something similar, but not exactly to this.
Well, I was out there with Maura Sullivan with one of her classes.
Yeah, but she probably walked you through all this then. Okay, anyone who's having issues at this junction so far? Have I moved?
Well, I'm back where, so I am on the page, where it asks you to put in your state. I forgot, I put in New York State.
Yep.
And then it says, would you like to save your answers for the future surveys?
Yeah.
And I know you talked about that, but I wasn't there when you talked about it. I was
Yeah,
doing
so all you need to do for that is at the top right here, these three little lines. You're gonna hit that, and you're just gonna hit set favorite answers.
I don't see that part.
The very top right of the screen.
I can't even follow him with what he's doing.
No, I don't.
High and low. I
Yeah,
I
so
don't-
so
we're not-
for the folks who are lost, again, we can kind of answer some of these questions, and all of this information will be available to you guys after the training. So you're gonna get all these slides tomorrow, so you can go through it at your own.
All right. all
I'm
right.
always here to help answer any questions as well.
Thank you, babe.
So basically, once you get through this process, what you're gonna do, you're gonna hit simple. And then for the search area, you're just gonna want to hit the little kind of bullseye and make sure that the point is where you are in the world. Then you're gonna hit the little green plus for presence record, and it's gonna take you down to actually record an invasive species point. So the way it works here is you would select the species that you're looking for, and this is to note whether you found this species or not, because these are practice points tonight. You're just going to select the first option. It says a fake species for testing. And as you scroll down, there's going to be all these other fields. So this is going to give you options to take pictures. You can take a close-up picture. You can take a general picture. Take as many pictures as you can, highlighting the different identifying characteristics that we went through before. All of these points that you enter into IMAP invasives are double checked by us, and we can't confirm whether you found what you think you found unless you take pictures. So please remember to take photos. Once you take photos, it's going to give a bunch of other options. For the most part, what we're really looking for is for plant fields. You're just going to put with the distribution, whether it was a trace, sparse, dense, monoculture, or linearly scattered. And then for percent cover fields, you're just going to select percent cover class. And I know this isn't really on these slides. This is more if you just found like spotted lanternfly, some kind of insects here, these different categories. But if you were going through this with plants, you just put select cover and then just guess kind of how much eyeballing the cover is. Once you get through that, at the very bottom, you're going to have an option to add an additional species. So you could hit this little plus button here and you could add more species on. So if you find more than one species at the same location, you keep adding these to the same point. And then if you don't find any species, you're going to just make that in a non-detected record. It's going to be the same idea that we did with the detected record. For the non-detected record, it's the same information you're essentially putting in, And what we want you to do is if you don't find any of these invasive species at a particular site, or if you only find 1 or 2 of these species, we want you to still enter in non-detected records for all the other species that we're looking for. So you find Norway maple, but you don't find honeysuckle, privet, and multiflora rose, then you're going to put in the same observation that you found Norway maple, and then for non-detected, you're going to just go through and you're just going to put in multiflora rose, honeysuckle, and privet, and all those things. And once you do that, you can go to the very bottom of the page. You could click the little checkmark, the very, very bottom, and it's going to say survey completed. You could either save it in the outbox or you could directly send it now. And uploading records, if you take a point without Wi-Fi, it's going to be sitting in your outbox. Just make sure that when you go home, you just click that little outbox there. You go into the, let me just move this up here. You go down here and you just click send. So your points are actually uploaded into the database. That is pretty much it. This information isn't super important. If you just want to enter in like the site name where you are, and if you ever need to go through and remove anything, you always hit that little trash can at the bottom too. So yeah, that is pretty much how to use IMAP invasives on the Survey 123 form.